Female Professionalism with our presenter, Dr. Heather Lofton. My name is Lucy Sandell, and I'm the Senior Associate Director of Career Advancement for your Northwestern Alumni Association. We'll begin shortly, and we're so excited that Heather is joining us for this great topic. But first, a few housekeeping items I'd like to share with you. You'll notice on the right side of your screen that there are a few different tabs. Please send in your questions through the chat, and we'll be saving plenty of time at the end of the presentation to answer these questions. So please send them in now and throughout the webinar. Should you experience any technical issues during the webinar, you can email the Big Marker team for further assistance at support@bigmarker.com. Make sure you have good internet connection and with no other tabs open on your screen, as that can sometimes interfere with you hearing the presentation. Lastly, a link to access the recording of the webinar will be sent to all registrants later today. Now let's move on to why we're all here. Dr. Heather Lofton is an integrative therapist, well-versed in addressing mental health concerns among individual adults and couples from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds, social economic statuses, religious beliefs, and sexual orientations. Her specialty areas of treatment are women's health issues and professional women with depression, anxiety, and work-life balance concerns. Dr. Lofton's primary area of research and treatment more specifically focuses on high-achieving minority female professionals who are presented with mental health constraints. Her more common areas of treatment for couples specifically include communications issues, conflict, trust building, premarital work, infidelity, and divorce. Dr. Lofton is dedicated to providing cultural, competent, and systemic care. I'm going to hand it over, and thank you so much for being here, Heather.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Please, everyone, let me know or let Lucy know if you can or cannot hear me well. I'm so excited to present today on trends, treatment, and triumph in multicultural female professionalism. This webinar is a contribution to a larger growing conversation about the multiplex experience of high-achieving female professionals. Growing rates of depression and anxiety are present among this community of women, exposing greater need for treatment designed to address burnout, motherhood, marriage, single life, navigating the professional environment, relationships, and much more. Current research on the multicultural female professional experience will be presented along with the development of mental health constraints and some treatment guidance. So as I continue, I wanted to provide a little bit of structure. I will briefly introduce myself in addition to what Lucy shared. I'll do a little bit of research overview. And as I continue to address the experiences of multicultural female professionalism, I do want to address that I am including clinical observations and some empirically validated research focused on racial, ethnic, minority, and majority women, women who identify with the LGBTQA community, married women, mothers, and single women. Now, research on this growing population of women is unfortunately quite sparse. Therefore, this is also a compilation of scientific studies, popular psychology articles, and clinical case studies and observations. Just for clarification, the term professional is defined to include female college graduates that are active participants in advanced professional fields. In addition, as I begin to unpack the term multicultural female professionalism, ultimately I am exploring the multiplicity of intersections of being a female and a professional. I will review some of the current mental health trends observed and reported among this growing population of women, and then outline the need for culturally specific and effective treatment methods. So as Lucy shared, again, my name is Dr. Heather Lofton. I began my clinical training here at Northwestern University's The Family Institute, and I currently practice as a staff therapist. I did want to move down and before we get going, briefly review my own research on multicultural female professionalism and mental health. My dissertation research titled The Risk and Protective Factors for Depression Among African American Professional Women, a grounded theory study, was really the foundation of my clinical interest, in recognition that that research area is vastly underdeveloped. The experience of all professional women has not been observed and reported on per the growth and development of the female presence in the workforce since about the 1930s. So fast forward to 2019, women are leading economic forces and creating an undeniable shift in professional image and culture. I would like to continue taking a closer look at what is a part of that growth and development process, examining the mental and physical demands. So the purpose of my dissertation study was first to explore the understanding and experiences and coping mechanisms for depression among predominantly African American professional women, while uncovering some culturally protective factors using culturally appropriate theoretical frameworks. Second was to further investigate the experience of microaggressions, racial and sexual discrimination and harassment in the workplace as risks for depression among this population of women. And I used stress theory and critical race theory to help guide that research study. So ultimately, the study exposed the need to hear from all professional working women, acknowledging the multitude of experience and highlighting the differences and similarities of reported constraints. With this research and my clinical interactions with professional women of all racial ethnic backgrounds, I began to uncover the multiplicity of female professionalism as we navigate areas of work, family, relationship, self, and society. So I wanted to go ahead and review some current research and mental health trend reports. While women have been working in a multitude of capacities before the world was round, the concept of female professionalism is a fairly new phenomenon. Conversations about economic restructuring and errors of social exclusion are now happening on a global scale, finally acknowledging the power of female professionals. Women continue to break socio-historical and systemic barriers, obtaining seats at the table, accolades, and a presence and attention that is, quite frankly, long overdue. Now, as the female professional experience continues to grow, recognizing achieving professional women with children, elite professional women of color, young professional women, professional female LGBTQA leaders, professional women with partners. Ultimately, it's now time to raise awareness and surveillance of the psychological demands and challenges a part of those experiences. So reviewing mental health concerns such as depression, anxiety, stress management, and burnout, desensitization of symptoms, and health-seeking behaviors are conversations that need to begin to take place. Current research focused on professional women's experience is again quite limited. However, risks such as depression, anxiety, stress management, and awareness of symptoms are now being reported and detected much more, which again prompts a greater discussion on treatment, efficacy, and cultural competence. So I wanted to go ahead and jump into what some of these mental health trends actually look like and what they mean. Expanding on some of the reported mental health trends among the female community, a current research study observing health status among 40,000 households in the United Kingdom collected data observing physical and mental health from 23,000 men and women. Ultimately, their findings observed that women that work long hours, based on assessment, had the worst mental health when compared to their male counterparts, and women who worked standard hours, which on their end was about 35 to 40 hours per week. Long hours look like 55 hours or more. Now, that data again was taken in the United Kingdom, and acknowledging some cultural differences between the UK and America. The 2017 Bureau of Labor Statistics notes that Americans work on average 44 to 50 hours a week, which is their idea of long hours, which ultimately leads me to speculate that individuals are working much longer hours than reported, not to mention the women that work about 60 to 80-hour shifts and then come home to partner and parent second shifts, acknowledging that work is not only done outside of the home. And so now, with such professional, societal, and familial demands, symptoms of burnout are now being considered risks. Now, I recognize that the term burnout has now become a very kind of pop psychology term, but it's actually very tied to clinical concerns. So what is burnout? What does it look like? When you Google the term burnout, the first definition that surfaces is pertaining to a machine that has reduced fuel or substance to nothing through use or combustion, which quite frankly is not too far removed from the human experience. The Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines burnout as exhaustion of physical or emotional strength or motivation, usually as a result of prolonged stress or frustration. Now, stress and frustration are not complex phenomena, and research finds that women experience stress more frequently than men, which is not necessarily a surprise. But stress can be a result of different life experiences, and therefore the outward expression can be different as well. For example, an African American single childless chief executive officer battling overexposure to this current political climate may not share the same stressors as a Caucasian divorced mother and chief of surgery. However, both require attention because both experiences can welcome something like burnout. So next question is, how can we avoid burnout? With effective stress management tools is my go-to answer. Identifying what does your stress look like and what helps you when you are stressed can begin the development of what stress management strategies are most sustainable for you and what areas need to improve versus what is working just well. It is also important to note non-productive coping mechanisms for stress. And while I 100% understand the joy of coming home and eating a large cheese pizza or not eating at all, then buying an expensive bag can be incredibly satisfying. The sustainability and productivity and efficacy of those go-to mechanisms is greatly challenged. So stress is a symptom of very demanding circumstances, often resulting in mental and emotional strain and tension. Now, in my clinical observation of most professional women, stress is an experience navigated more often than eliminated. It's something that we may experience on a day-to-day capacity, not so much in isolated events. which brings about a concern about how common it is and how often it is reoccurring, in that it probably goes often undetected or sometimes ignored. And so in many ways, the question is, sweaty palms, mood fluctuation, appetite loss or increase. How do those symptoms get noticed when you have gleaming deadlines, work environment is emotionally unsafe, there is social injustice and unrest rapidly progressing, your partner is requesting more partner time, or your child wants you present on field trip day. The social pressures of having children are very present, and at the same time, there's now a challenge in finding a mate. Ultimately, there are so many stressors present that stress management is definitely in a critical state and is a quality response to figuring out how you can manage things like burnout and stress when they come. And so I have a poll question that you all can answer at your leisure. The question is, have you ever observed someone or experienced yourself the symptoms of burnout? So please go ahead and submit that now or later, but it's a great question to understand your own experience with burnout. So conversations about stress and burnout lead me to my next slide on some of the mental health trends that I have predominantly observed. There are more and more clinical exacerbations of stress that lead to depression and anxiety. Now, both of those terms are excessively used in society, ranging from childhood experiences to adult experiences. But as we are unfolding the female professional experience, current research suggests that in order to understand a woman's experience with depression, it is crucial to uncover her social context and daily navigated identities, such as mom, partner, caregiver, CEO, president. We navigate so much throughout the day, and in many ways they can take a toll on our mental and emotional state. So depression is a persistent public health concern among all women of varying racial, ethnic backgrounds and socioeconomic statuses. And in fact, the lifetime prevalence rates indicate that 21.3% of women currently live with depression as a mental health condition. Now, while there are multiple forms of depression, I am primarily focusing on persistent depressive disorder, also termed as dysthymia. And I will also briefly reference the experience of postpartum depression as well, because that is also something that can be experienced by working mothers. Now, persistent depressive disorder, again, is what I have researched and predominantly observed having a general role in female professionalism. Now, the degree to which this occurrence is experienced, in addition to how depression symptoms manifest, differs when factoring race, class, sexual orientation, partnership, and motherhood. So ultimately, there are different forms of depression and a growing prevalence among women, again, highlighting how this is a prominent experience, whether you are a single female, a partnered female, a childless female, or a female with children. Which moves me into the next experience of anxiety, which is very much researched in addition or in conjunction with depression. And it is, again, an additional common reoccurring theme among all professionals, male and female. and experienced differently. And in many ways, these experiences of anxiety and depression are closely tied to the foundation of stress and burnout and overwhelming demand. So I do want to review some common symptoms of both depression and anxiety, so that you can begin to not necessarily diagnose yourself, but certainly increase awareness and surveillance of what's going on for you. So some common symptoms of both depression and anxiety include, but certainly are not limited to, irritability, feelings of hopelessness and pessimism, loss of interest in what is normally enjoyed, difficulty sleeping, appetite changes, difficulty concentrating and making decisions, in many cases, but also more extreme cases, thoughts of death or suicide, excessive worrying and fear, restlessness, body tension, and an overall challenge of control. Now, again, without the intention of pathologizing some of these experiences, they can be observed in individuals that are not clinically depressed or experiencing something like generalized anxiety disorder. However, it is imperative to, again, increase awareness around the severity and the persistence of such symptoms. I have next your last poll question, which is, do you ever feel like you don't have time to focus on mental health, which means potentially, sure, you may experience something like a challenge in sleeping or something like restlessness, but you're on the go, so there really isn't much time to stop and check in with yourself. Again, you can answer that now or later. So as we are talking about the outcome of experiencing mental health constraints such as depression and anxiety, burnout, stress, and being overwhelmed, I did want to run through some of the risks that could leave multicultural professional women susceptible to something like depression. Now that we have briefly reviewed some of those clinical expressions, I would like to move on to discuss some of the harmful encounters and interactions at work that professional women of all racial, ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientations, religious affiliations, and socioeconomic statuses unfortunately experience, again, placing us at risk for some of the mental health concerns reviewed. Now, experiences such as racial and sexual harassment in the workplace are finally being heard after decades of reporting and unfortunately being silenced or labeled. In addition to the blatant acts of something like racism and sexism, predominantly racial and sexual minority professional women are experiencing more subdued offenses in the form of a term called microaggressions, which is also kind of a new term being used in different professional diversity settings. But ultimately, they are new forms of harassment defined as incidents that are sometimes very unintentional, unconscious acts of discrimination, but in all cases, unfortunately, quite harmful, especially when experienced daily. Provided a history of being silenced or ignored as women, it can be hypothesized that experiencing daily race and or gender related stress could begin to be impervious to racial and sexual discriminative encounters and pressures, but not the inevitable nature of psychological or physiological responses, ultimately leading us to things like desensitization of symptoms, and that we go to work, we endure these encounters and interactions, all the while they are manifesting in some type of way throughout our bodies, but we are not paying close attention to what that looks like, which makes it harder to target when it happens. As we are climbing corporate ladders and breaking through institutional ceilings, it is now important to assess what's going on during these daily journeys at work. And it's important to continue to vocalize what your experience is, first with yourself and then with an emotionally safe community, so that change can continue. So moving on to some socially related risks. As professional women, we are also active members of society, and stress can certainly come from environments outside of the workplace, again, placing us at high risk, while at the same time exposing us to systemic constraints when trying to access something like care. As we are more than halfway through the year 2019, the political climate has certainly prompted an increase in awareness around support. What communities have it and which communities do not. As research is expanding on the experiences of members of the LGBTQA community, the need for federal and social support remains in a critical state. Ultimately, these limitations place constraints on accessing
Heather, sorry, we just lost you. Heather, can you check your mic? We've lost your audio.
Okay, can you hear me now? I just checked the mic.
Yes, you're much better now. Thanks.
Okay, perfect.
We lost
Sorry
you
about that.
we lost you at the forces nowadays, lack of support, that sort of thing.
Okay, let's see here. So I'll just start again at highlighting what lack of support can look like for some of our LGBTQA female professional leaders, and that their experience of lack of federal support and social support, again, is in a critical state. And limitations such as federal support or lack of federal support and social support place constraints on accessing care and accessing help, which again, in many ways can maintain an overall lack of trust with institutional forces that again, should be designed to service everyone and everyone's needs. And I do want to preface that access to mental and physical health care is not strongly correlated. Is not a strongly correlated concern among advanced professional women. Ideally, we have more resources or we have more access. However, cultural competent care is another level of challenge when trying to advocate for oneself in help-seeking behaviors. That is predominantly an experience of our minority professionals, but certainly can be a diverse experience as well. Now, I do want to review the purpose of cultural competent providers because it is growing into a very critical nature. Ultimately, cultural competent care is to ensure that everyone is receiving the best possible treatment that not only tends to treat the clinical presenting problem, but also takes into account the cultural factors and experiences related to the presenting problem and its treatment. Again, going back to that example of the African American single childless CEO who is experiencing some depressive symptoms due to overexposure to this political climate, her treatment may look a little different than a Caucasian mother who is experiencing a divorce, who also navigates the demands and rigor of being a chief of surgery. So cultural competent care really does not identify with a one-size-fits-all treatment method. It's more about what the needs of the client are and how that gets highlighted and used in the clinic space. Ultimately, while professional women have access, in many instances we can still be left alone to deal with daily pressures. So it's very important to advocate for the cultural implications of what could be feeding your mental health experience. So I also want to move on to some interpersonal risks. And I think those need to be considered as well. And while I am not discounting the many female professionals with outstanding partners, family members, and community support, there is a growing trend of reported challenges with mate satisfaction and mate selection. While these challenges are predominantly researched among heterosexual couples, my observation is that this experience is quite diverse as well. The present day trends among men and women getting married, not specifying race or sexual orientation, do show that an overall delay of marriage is becoming more and more evident as the average age for getting married for both men and women has increased. Now, for some, I recognize partnership in marriage is not a desire. However, there is a reported mating crisis among highly educated women. This is an experience primarily among racial ethnic minority professional women, as it is becoming a challenge to find a mate that matches or exceeds the same academic and professional growth pattern and trajectory as herself. While this is an even larger systemic issue and a different presentation, challenges such as these can raise concern in other areas of partnering. Acknowledging some of our working mothers having children is now a not necessarily risk, but certainly a conversation that is taking place. Making the decision to not have children is becoming more and more popular among professional women, in addition to delaying having children due to professional desires. However, some professional women are now reporting being fearful of missing their biological opportunity based on either the dating pool or the pressures that are present in their professional experience. So a lot is being put at risk, a lot is at stake, and a lot can lead to increased worry or feelings of hopelessness around what you would like to see for your life. Conclusively, with each decision, there's definitely a socially constructed preference and therefore a pressure placed on autonomy and agency to assume your own identity and pace, direction and desire. And so I am hoping that more conversations can begin to take place, ultimately normalizing the experience of either not wanting to get married, not wanting to have children, or increasing awareness around what it feels like to experience a race against your biological clock, or worry about not finding a mate that you can build a sustainable life with. So many of these areas of living as a female are becoming more and more tied or more and more intersected with different identities that we have and navigate throughout our days. So now I want to move into treatment. Some of the answers to some of these problems that we are experiencing or just challenges. As noted, a lack of support is a strong predictor for depression among women. And while immediate and extended family support are ideal, community support is one of the primary coping needs for individuals experiencing depression, and professional arenas have a growing amount of organizations and groups to maintain that support. I am a big proponent of the many organizations and groups that are now being developed, which is one asset of our technological advancements. But these groups can also be culturally specific to meet the needs of what your professional life looks like and how that gets navigated with the rest of your life. So there are so many Chicago-based professional groups, such as Mocha Medicine, which is an organization for African American female physicians, or the Lesbian and Gay Bar Association of Chicago. There's also a phenomenal working professional mom group that I believe has multiple different meeting groups throughout the city. And so support and resources are very much a part of treatment and connected to treatment specifically for female professionals. I also want to highlight EAP programs, employee assistance programs, to try to dismantle the discomfort around utilizing those assistance programs, in addition to Family Medical Leave Act, which again are designed to help, but I recognize have unfortunately cultured a negative experience for many. So I look at those areas of professionalism to require improvements as well. Lastly, and my biggest recommendation is engaging in individual couples or family therapy, which again I highly encourage as a beneficial tool for guiding something like stress management development or assessing something like depression and anxiety symptoms, and conclusively finding solutions and building sustainable alternative adaptive behaviors. Ultimately, there are many different forms of treatment models and methods used to treat specifically depression and anxiety. I listed the primary methods and models that I work with per my own female professional case population. I predominantly rely on cognitive behavioral therapy as my base, with supportive models and theories based on the client's needs. CBT is one of the most empirically validated treatment methods in research connection to depression, and it certainly is an action-oriented treatment method that prompts you to be the leader of the change that you would like to see, and create new behaviors that help you lead your life in a different direction. So again, I very much encourage you to review some of the listed methods and models, and explore a little bit what therapy can do for you. As I am highly encouraging something like psychotherapy or counseling, I also wanted to note some of the treatment benefits, how this stuff can help us, how it can encourage us to take better care of ourselves while still remaining at the top of our game as female professionals. One is acknowledgement. There's great benefit in being able to acknowledge the presence of unwanted symptoms, and what is challenging. Adding on to the multiplex roles of navigating some of these symptoms on a regular basis, many times, again, they go unnoticed and therefore untreated. So they're being able to acknowledge a symptom that is not right is a power and a strength. So increasing awareness and being able to acknowledge what is going on for you, what symptoms appear more often than not, is a treatment benefit and something that a therapist can certainly increase and guide. In addition to stress management, knowing what to do when you are stressed and what are helpful tools and what is effective and special to you is a great benefit in being able to continue on, again, navigating home life, partner, child, parents, work, self. Stress management is a very effective tool for dealing with some daily stress. In addition to increased self-awareness, being able to check in with yourself, developing a closer relationship with yourself, may allow for you to catch some symptoms before they progress into the clinical range, which again, depathologizes the experience of, fatigue or restlessness or irritability, but it also places awareness of when those symptoms move into the clinical range. Also, building your own professional identity. Treatment and the use of something like therapy can create a little bit of agency and autonomy and the ability to construct what you want to see for your professional life and what you would like to do and how you would like to navigate the identities that you have, while deconstructing some of those socially constructed identities and pressures. Also, seeking therapy can help encourage better help-seeking behaviors. Again, being your own mental health advocate and creating normalcy around seeking help only puts you at an advantage. So in many ways, I want to encourage the use of you being your own leader. Society has such power and such control, but as professional women are breaking through barriers and climbing professional ladders, it can no longer be at the expense of our mental health. And so I'm hopeful that this brief presentation increases the awareness, allows you to look inward, reflect a little bit more, to analyze what your experience has looked like and where you would like to see it move to. I also want to provide the Family Institute's information, which again is Northwestern University's mental health practice. And here I meet with individuals and couples However, we also service families and children and adolescents. So please, by any means, if you feel like this would be a great place for you to help continue your powerful professional experience and improve on what that looks like, I do encourage calling that number and requesting an appointment. I would like to now move into some questions or anything that anybody would like for me to expand on.
Heather, this is Lucy, and I just wanted to give you some feedback on the poll results.
Okay.
The question of burnout, 69% of the people on this webinar have experienced symptoms of burnout themselves. 31% have observed symptoms of burnout in others. How many? No one has reported that they have not observed symptoms of burnout at all.
Okay, yeah, so that really speaks highly to how prevalent burnout is and how much it's being talked about and how it's definitely time to do something about it.
Sorry, for the other poll, it was 64% don't feel they have enough time to focus on their mental health, while 36% feel that they do have enough time.
Okay, so again, just as I unfortunately expected, it's pretty hard to stop and check in with yourself throughout the day to see if the headache that I'm experiencing is the same headache that I've been experiencing 3 weeks in a row now. Are my sweaty palms a result of the heat in my office, or is this a result of a rapid heartbeat? It makes a lot of sense as to why we as professional women feel like we do not have the time to address what's going on. And again, I'm hopeful that this presentation can be a small contribution to increasing that awareness and encouraging the fact that you do have the time.
I encourage people on the webinar to type in their questions. I did have a question of my own listening to your presentation. Thank you so much for giving so much great information. When you talk about the triumph of female professionals, specifically multicultural female professionalism, are you seeing an increase in people coming forward and saying, I need help. I think that I should be saying, I've got it all, but they're struggling in some way.
Yes, so thankfully I am seeing an increase in women coming forward and no longer feeling like I have to do it all and I have to burn out at the end of it. More and more women who have very high achieving, demanding, and rigorous professional titles are recognizing that they can't do it all. They shouldn't have to do it all, and recognizing that is a strength and not a weakness. And so I do observe that a lot of the conversations that are taking place now and a lot more of the women who are coming forth are realizing that they can no longer navigate all of these identities and these roles at the expense of themselves. When we hear that, it's like, well, duh, sure, I can't help them if I can't help myself. But in many ways, that gets glossed over. So there is, to answer your question, there is an increase in women coming forward and talking about what their experience is like. And more I am hearing the dismantling of that superwoman persona, or in many ways just reconstructing what that looks like, and that we can all still be super women but know what our boundaries and limits are.
Thank you. And I apologize for the feedback. Well, there's a question for you. When is it appropriate to seek a life coach versus a therapist?
So that's a great question. As we are talking about more experiences of clinical encounters, such as depression and anxiety, those should be left more so to seeking a therapist or a counselor. In the event that as a professional woman, you are realizing I'm not necessarily valued at the company that I'm at, I'm feeling like I could certainly move into a different direction. However, I'm a little unclear about what that direction could look like. That's when I would encourage possibly seeking out a life coach. However, when mental health constraints are present, the training of a life coach is not suitable to treat those types of experiences. So more so transitions, possibly feelings of not knowing what the next step is and needing some guidance around finding that out. Utilizing someone like a life coach can certainly be beneficial as well.
That was a great question. I thought that this is something that a lot of people question as well.
Yes, definitely. I have observed that there are more and more very helpful and very beneficial life coaches, especially targeting professional experiences. More and more people are coming forth with that training and talent. However, there is a clear distinction between what is a clinical experience and what is more of a transitional experience.
Great. Well, unless there are any further questions, I'd just like to pass it over to Heather for any last minute tips, tricks that we should be considering if we think we're experiencing burnout or mental health issues.
Yes. So if you feel like you could possibly identify with some of the symptoms that I listed earlier, I want to go ahead and encourage you to consider seeking a therapist. In many ways, the field of mental health and the profession of therapists is becoming more and more empirically validated to identify that everyone needs to see somebody and everyone needs to talk about some of the symptoms that they are experiencing, hopefully before they move into clinical severity. Also, the one very new and often used, believe it or not, asset is Google. I really encourage Googling some of the anxiety and depression available assessments online, again, not to diagnose yourself, predominantly to identify with what clinicians and physicians are looking for, and to give you an idea if you need to go ahead and move forward with something like therapy. But at the same time, if you want to move in a different direction, increasing self-care is also a conversation that is being talked about more and more. And self-care can look so many different ways. It doesn't have to look like a bubble bath. It doesn't have to look like a shopping spree. In many ways, self-care can look like at work, 2 minutes before you check into your first meeting or meet with your first client, you jot down some thoughts about how you're feeling that morning, what your heart rate feels like, just checking in with yourself, designating a little bit of time throughout the day to make sure that you're aware of what's going on for you. And I recognize creating that time can feel like a burden. However, as women, we tend to multitask. And so in many ways, when you are taking your bathroom break in between clients, that may also be the moment to jot down in the notes section of your phone how you're feeling. Or when you're on your commute home in the privacy of your car, that may be a moment to pull out your phone, of course, in driver setting, and turn on that voice memo app and start talking about your day. I think that ultimately bringing more self-awareness to the surface can help professional women become more in control and be able to manage the experience of stress, because again, it is not an isolated experience. It's also not one that ultimately gets eliminated. It just gets navigated in a more effective way.
That's great advice. Last question. We've got a bunch at the last minute. How do you distinguish between being stretched in a job versus being in a toxic environment?
So let's see, how do you distinguish between being stretched in a job and being in a toxic environment? I am wondering if there may not be a universal experience of being stretched in a job. That may be per your own boundaries and limits to define what being stretched feels like. So that may be determined by you. However, toxicity in the work environment can look a couple of different ways. Again, highlighting the political climate, feeling like you can't talk about what's going on, feeling silenced in the workspace, that's not necessarily being stretched. So that's a very different experience. Having a boss who talks down to you, or having a boss who does not respect boundaries and calls late at night, or demands work on days that should not be demanded. That kind of identifies with more of a toxic workspace. Enduring sexual harassment or racial harassment, again, that more aligns with toxic workspaces. Regarding being stretched too thin, I do encourage you determining what that looks like for you. And that may mean you are beginning to address areas of your work experience that you may have to pull back on because you're feeling too overworked, or you may have to communicate a restructure of responsibilities or a redirection of responsibilities because you're feeling a bit too stretched. And so I hope that creates some clear distinctions and also some agency to determine what being stretched looks like for you. However, toxicity is a bit more clear.
Great. Do you have a resource or guide for incorporating self-care at work?
Oh, that's a great question. So not necessarily any go-to resources come to mind. I off the top of my own clinical head, I do again encourage different breaks throughout the day, and they don't have to be 30-minute hour breaks. Again, just that 5-minute bathroom break can be utilized in many different ways. And so self-care while at work, I do encourage exploring how you use your time when you get to work, the middle of work, and when you leave work. Breaking that up so that it doesn't feel like I am here doing a marathon until 5:30 or 6:30. So I think that moving into your workspace with a different direction on how you're going to manage that space may allow for you to increase and observe some self-care practices that you can do at work. However, going back to Google, I will say that there are a ton of pop psychology articles that highlight some pretty good outside of work and at work self-care strategies. However, again, it's very personal. I don't necessarily love reality TV, but coming home and watching Housewives may be very cathartic for some people. So I do encourage reviewing what's already out there. However, at work self-care regimen I do want to highlight is a little bit of breaking up your day and restructuring how you use the breaks that you do have, or implementing new small breaks throughout the day.
Okay, a couple more. Can you comment on trends, based on the impact of younger versus older female professionals?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. Can you comment on trends based on impact of younger versus older female professionals?
Sure. So there are clear and distinct differences between younger and older female professionals, just based on growth and development. Some older female professionals may be transitioning into menopause or caregiving for their own parents, or launching their children. So those are clear differences and clear stressor differences than a older female professional may experience than a younger. However, research on millennials and their professional experience is highlighting a lot more of the depression literature, and that finding a career is more challenging, sustaining that career while acknowledging some of the...
Lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, good. Yes, sorry.
No problem. Did you all hear the some of the distinctions that are more so a part of older female professional experiences?
What we missed was the millennials.
Okay, perfect. So some of the research that is coming out right now is highlighting the experience of being depressed. Because what some millennials see on the internet or see on social media are these trends of becoming a millionaire overnight. And that's not necessarily a universal experience. And so sustaining a career that provides your ability to live and finance your life, in addition to it fulfilling a passion, is something that I see more so in younger professionals and millennials versus some of my more seasoned female professional experiences. So some of those are nestled in, again, growth and development, but experience such as finding a mate is definitely a shared experience between younger and older female professionals. Children is something that is shared. I just read an article about fertility and freezing eggs. In many ways, young professional females are worried, again, about their ability to do that. As they are prioritizing their career and not necessarily having the time or finding the mate to build a partnership and build a family with. So there are some clear distinctions. Unfortunately, the literature is quite limited, but there are conversations definitely taking place, but both experience, young and older, experience the pressures of being a female and being a professional, and some of those pressures are quite antiquated, and so that's certainly a shared experience. I'm hoping that answers your question.
Yeah, and there's one last one because we're at just a little bit past noon, actually. It was similar to the stretch. In the medical field, there's a sense that they're stretched to the max, and the pressure is
Yes, so that's a great question. My caseload predominantly is working with female physicians, and the concept of burnout and being stretched is almost a motivation. The idea of, great, all my hair fell out and I'm at the top of my game, is almost praised. And so I recognize that some of these work cultures and environments are setting a tone to navigate burnout as if it's something that you should be experiencing. And so some of that, again, may fall on your own shoulders of advocating for what's going to work for you. That may look like
Okay, we lost you again. I'm sorry.
No problem. I was talking about the fact that redirecting work culture primarily for physicians can certainly bring on negative feedback. And in many ways, I am not necessarily suggesting not doing your job. However, certainly finding areas that can be boundaried, or finding areas that you can begin to advocate that you need to pull back on in order to do your job to the best of your abilities. So a lot of it is communicating and advocating for what's going to work for you so that you can excel at what you do.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you all. This is great.
And thank you for sticking with us. Participants of the webinar, we'll be sending out a copy of the recording. So thanks so much, and have a good rest of your day. Go Cats!
Thanks again. Go Cats.